Hello everyone, a very warm welcome to our 4th international edition of NParks Wildlife Management Webinar Series. Thank you all for joining us on Zoom. My name is Brian, and together with my colleague Chun Beng, we will be your hosts for this evening. So raising awareness and understanding of wildlife is key to allow communities to safely share spaces with wildlife and to enjoy the benefits of living close in nature. In this Wildlife Management Webinar Series, International Edition, we seek out international subject matter experts to better understand how other countries actually manage human-wildlife encounters. Okay, to facilitate today's Q&A session, we will be using Slido. During the sharing, you can start submitting questions using the QR code shown or head to slido.com and enter the event code 1860713. Without further ado, I'll hand the time over to Chun Beng, who will share more about our speaker for today. Chun Beng, please.
Okay, thank you, Brian. Again, welcome everybody to today's international edition. The rest of the session will be free of advertisement and subliminal messaging. But very glad to have with us Dr. Giovanna. She's a good friend of ours, and she is, I would say, she is a leading expert on, amongst many other things, she is also an expert on wild boars. And she is currently the Europe Director of the Botstiber Institute for Wildlife Fertility Control, which is based at the University of York. She has been actually around the world involved in the management and discussion of wild boar issues ranging from countries like Australia, USA, to Europe, especially in the home country of Italy, and as well as even in Israel. Her research interest currently focuses on ecology and population control of wild boar, and using fertility control to actually manage wildlife and free-roaming livestock. Today's session, she'll be actually touching on wild boar ecology and population dynamics, and then she'll provide examples of what has been done and what can be done in the future. She will highlight how these technologies can contribute to the management of wild boars, and then discuss things that are in the pipeline that we can have additional tools inside our toolkit to manage the populations that we have in Singapore as well. So without going on, I'm going to invite Dr. Giovanna now to take over and share with us her slides. Dr. Giovanna?
Good morning. I will try to share my screen. Is the screen okay?
Yes, Giovanna is working.
Perfect. Good morning, everybody. So today I'll talk briefly about wild boar population trends around the world and methods to mitigate human wild boar, human wild pig conflicts. Okay, so human wild boar conflicts are increasing, and that's mainly because wild boar are intelligent and adaptable, and we have created the ideal conditions for wild boar to expand. We have food in cities, we have people interested or loving little piglets. We have more crops around the world and more crops throughout the year. And wild boar will be the main problem for crops and for a number of other issues. For instance, diseases, they'll transmit diseases, they'll cause traffic accidents, they might affect the number of animal and plant species. We also have wild boar in cities. Our cities around the world are growing, and the wild boar and the wild pigs are very happy about it. This is a story from Germany, when apparently somebody in 2007 called the police, an old lady called the police to say, there's an ugly dog in my garden, and the ugly dog turned out to be a wild boar, and Berlin was the first city to report, probably there were wild boar already in many other cities, but to report the fact that there were wild boar everywhere and growing. So just to give you some numbers, this is a paper that we published a few years ago with another 16 colleagues, and these on the y-axis, there's the number of wild boar culled as hunting in Europe for about 30 years. And as you can see, it doesn't matter, the country doesn't matter, the wild boar are going up all the time. And I think the highest number of wild boar shot in a year that we have on record is 800,000, more than 822,000 in 2016-2018 in Germany. So it is literally millions of wild boar are culled every year in Europe, and they're still growing. Exactly the same is happening in the States or in Australia. So wild boar are growing in numbers and are growing in range, in distribution range. So this is wherever wild boar or wild pigs are, they grow. And the main cause of mortality of wild boar, at least in Europe, but also in the States, also in Japan, are the hunters. So hunting is the main cause of mortality. However, the number of hunters around the world is declining, or certainly not going up, even for those countries where hunting goes up, not going up as the number of wild boar. So there's this gap that it's growing by the year between the numbers of animals hunted and the number of hunters. The reasons for wild boar increase, I touched briefly on it, is mild winters, lack of large predators. Obviously, in different countries, some of these factors are more important than others. Reforestation, which is happening very much in Europe and in the US. Supplementary feeding, although this is often forbidden. Illegal translocations, mainly by hunters. Decreasing number of hunters. There's also very little monitoring on the effect of population control, and very often lack of coordinated population control, which means that different regions do different things, and the result is that, again, the wild boar are growing. And as I mentioned before, the main problem with wild boar growing are disease transmission. And I can quote, for instance, African swine fever. African swine fever is bad not only for wild boar, but because if it goes into the pig population, the pig export, the meat, is forbidden, is stopped. So that could cause billions of damage to a country. So disease transmission is one. Road traffic accident, attacks on dogs or other companion animals or people. They're rare, but they happen. And crop damage. This is the work of two colleagues in Switzerland. If we start with 100 wild boar, after a few years, lambda is the population growth. The population growth can be up to 160. So within a few years, the population has become much, much higher. And even if the average numbers are in between the purple line and the green line, you can see as in a matter of a few years, the population can become 3, 4, up to 10 times higher than before. So that is if a population is left as it is, with no hunting and no removal of animals. We spoke about the impacts. These are this is the list of impacts of wild boar. And these are some examples of impact. So this is compensation for crop damage by ungulates like deer and wild boar in France. The wild boar was making up 85% of crop damage. And likewise, on the bottom of the slide, the number of wild boar culled was going in parallel with compensation for crop damage to farmers. Very similar, the road traffic accident, this is in Sweden, has gone up in parallel with the number of wild boar culled, which we use often as a proxy for the number of wild boar actually there. So what do we do when we have too many wild boar? I think a lot of people will agree that we can call wild boar overabundant, and we can use two sets of methods, lethal methods and non-lethal methods. And I'll go quickly through some of them, and then feel free to ask questions later if you want to know more about anything in particular. Trapping and culling. This is by far the most common method. The advantages are that wild boar are generally easy to trap. Traps are generally humane. It allows selective removal. It's fast acting at population level, and traps can be moved to other areas and reused. Among the disadvantages is that some animals become trap shy. Very difficult to use traps on high slopes. The cost per animal removed will increase as the number decreases. It's very labor intensive. Is effective only when natural food is limiting, because otherwise wild boar will not enter the traps. And the traps are prone to human interference. If you have somebody in your country that does not like killing, it's very, very easy to interfere with the trap and to stop the trap from trapping. And then you have the problem of where do you put the carcass. Shooting by trained staff, again, cost-effective at high density. It allows for a quick reduction in number, and it's useful in remote areas. In some parts of the world where the vegetation is very dense, it makes sense to use dogs to flush animals in dense vegetation. The disadvantages is that we don't know how wild boar will respond to these changes. So in terms of changes to shooting, in terms of changes in space and time. So for instance, wild boar can run away from an area, which would be a problem if there was a disease in the area. The unit cost, like before, increases as number decrease, and some dogs may be injured or killed. Poisoning, highly contentious. The advantages is that, again, is cost effective, can be used at large or a local scale, is fast acting, and may target all the animals that do not want to enter the traps. However, there are serious concerns about the humaneness of poison, of toxicants, depending on which one people consider. Poison can affect non-target species, again, can make some animals bait shy. Toxicants are not available in most of the countries. You might have to put a ban on meat consumption. And I would say that the biggest disadvantage is that toxicants generally are publicly opposed. You can exclude animals only from an area. I'm not going through all of these, or the list of bullet points, but the main problem of exclusion is that you just shift the problem elsewhere. So exclusion could work for some precious crops or from some areas, but is not necessarily acting on the number of animals, it's just shifting the number of animals. Translocation is something that a lot of people often advocate because they don't realize what translocation of problem animals means. People think, well, the advantage is a quick reduction. I'm not sure it is humane, but some people feel it is humane. and it's very much publicly supported as a quick fix. However, translocation is expensive, can only be applied to small scale. When you translocate an animal, particularly a stressed animal, you also translocate all the pathogens that come with the animal. So it could be very dangerous also to translocate everything else. The welfare of translocated animals, generally animals either go back home, particularly animals, intelligent animals like wild boar, or start reoffending. So if animals were snatching off food from people, you move them to another area and they will do exactly the same. And also translocation encourages people to think that it's a quick fix, problem solved, and that's not necessarily the case. Fertility control is what I've been working on for many years. People feel that it's humane generally, can be effective in the long term, may decrease disease transmission, is definitely very publicly supported. It's unlikely to have effect on behavior and can be used to integrate culling. We'll talk about it a little bit later, a bit more. However, it will be slow acting compared to other forms like removal through trap and dispatch. We don't have oral contraceptive, which is a major problem now. So we do have injectable contraceptives, so we have to trap, inject, and release animals. They require multiple doses, so you can only apply to small scale and to specific contexts. And it is expensive because using injectables means that you have to trap your animal first. So let's delve more into contraceptives. We do have now, and when I say we do, they are available but only in the States, well, in a few countries, in fact, immunocontrceptives. These are vaccines that induce antibodies to proteins or hormones that are essential for reproduction. One or a few doses will make animal infertile for a number of years. And so we do have some practical applications, credible. And I'll give you some example. This is the first trial that I was involved with in the UK. We had 12 female wild boar sows injected with this contraceptive called Gonacon. And we were working in collaboration with the states, with the lab that created this vaccine. And we also had 12 animals that acted as controls. We kept these animals for up to 6 years, some for longer, in fact. And of the treated animals with one single dose of contraceptive, 11 out of 12 did not reproduce for many years. And we had no side effects on physiology, behavior, welfare, no problem at all. So because of this, we went to the field and we injected free living animals. Many of these animals ended up shot dead. So it was a bit difficult to obtain some results from these animals. However, we could prove that Gonacon did not affect ongoing pregnancy. If you inject an animal that is pregnant, that animal will, the pregnancy will go to term normally, and then the animal will become infertile. We found that treatment with this contraceptive did not affect spatial behavior. We found antibodies to the vaccine in most animals, and we could find evidence that sows that had had litters before became infertile. The nice thing about this project is that it gave birth to 2 other projects. One was immunocontraception to manage wild boar in Spain and in peri-urban areas of Spain, and the other one was the same but in Hong Kong. So a couple of mention now to papers about models, mathematical models. So there are 2 papers published recently, one from our group and one from a group of American colleagues. We're very happy to say that although all this work was done independently, our results seem to agree. So the first paper is by Kim Pepin on what if we use fertility control and culling together. And Pepin came, the results suggested that you can maintain infertility in more than 50% of sows per year. However, if you are in isolated population, adding fertility control to culling makes it much faster, the population reduction. And in open population, this is 30% faster, but it's still a gain compared to culling alone. In the project that we did with another colleagues, we had two isolated populations, one in Italy and one in the UK. They all had similar area and similar number of animals. So they both had about 2,000 wild boar, and both managers, the managers of both areas wanted to bring the population down to 400. So we simulated different proportion of population being contracepted or different proportion of animals to be culled. And the red line is the target of 400, and the black line is where the population is going. So where the black line hits the red line, it means that we have reached 400. And this is a complicated graph, but I think the take-home message from this is that if you go from left to right, you increase the proportion of animals being contracepted. And as you can see in the top right corner, the black line never meets the red line. It means that, at least in this scenario, fertility control on its own is unable to control the population. If you go from top to down, so increase in proportion of culling, as we said, will affect population size very quickly. But the best results of this is here. So if you keep culling at 40%, which is doable, and then increase the proportion of the population that you can contracept. So you start with 2,000 wild boar. If you have culling about 40%, like in Pepin, you maintain the population stable. However, if you increase 20% of contraception, you go to half your population, so from 2,000 to 1,000 in 3 years, or you go down to the target of 400 in 18 years. And then if you increase the proportion of animals contracepted, again, your population reduction is much faster. Which means that adding fertility control to feasible level of culling can reduce the population of wild boar faster than culling alone. When I was working on fertility control, we were also wondering, okay, we need to produce, somebody in the world has to fund research on developing an oral vaccine, because the oral vaccine will be the only, an oral contraceptive, that will be the only way we will ever be able to use fertility control at population size. So in preparation for when the oral vaccine will be available, my team developed what we call the BOSS, the Boar Operated System. And I'll show you a little video at the end of this work, at the end of this talk. And the BOSS, you will see from the video how it works, but it was a very successful way of delivering baits to wild boar and to wild boar only. We also tested it in the Caribbean, in Italy, and in the States. In the States, the only animal that could fit from the BOSS was the bear. So we were joking, I would say, okay, we'll call it the Bear Operated System. But it worked very well to deliver baits when the bait will contain the oral contraceptive. So we do have a method to deliver a bait that will contain a contraceptive to wild boar and to wild boar only. So future work in this area we still don't know a lot of things about, for instance, about the behavioral effect of population control. And the reason these are important is mainly for disease management. If you start shooting animals, or if you start contracepting them, it doesn't matter, or removing them, will they start moving further afield? And we need to know this because of the disease transmission angle. The cost, in many papers, many of the papers that have been published on wild boar management, very few people calculate the cost, and we need to start doing it. And we need to start calculating costs in terms of staff time, that generally is the most expensive part of any of these programs. Sustainability, are the costs sustainable? Feasibility, even if we had oral contraceptives, can we really feed them to the majority of the population? I believe we can, because we have examples from vaccines for classical swine fever, where we know that we can feed most of the population. But again, with a contraceptive vaccine, we have to test this. Public support, crucial in any form of wildlife management and wildlife interactions or wildlife coexistence. And alternatives, very few people stop and think about alternatives. Generally, choices are often guided by emotion or by public pressure. And I applaud the fact that NParks, in the video that we saw, has chosen to choose science-based approach. That is not necessarily what people understand, and it's important that people understand that science-based approach is the only way to go about decisions. But in terms of alternatives, we need to consider various alternatives to managing these animals. Conclusions, human wild boar conflicts will grow in parallel with interest for non-lethal control. At present, we only have culling and poisoning to manage wild boar impacts. Contraception, I believe, could be used to complement traditional methods once, and that's a very important point, an effective oral contraceptive is developed. And again, I would urge everybody listening to think in terms of how do we go about producing an oral contraceptive, because that will be a game changer. But again, remembering that fertility control, at least based on the modeling, cannot solve the problem on its own and needs to be coupled with other methods. I would like to thank all the many people that took part to all the studies that I quoted, the funders of all the studies, the supporters, the volunteers that work with us, the Botstiber Institute for Fertility Control. Have a look at the website if you want, because many of these concepts are explained in greater detail. And obviously the Singapore National Park Board for hosting me and this webinar. Thank you.
Thanks, Giovanna. Yeah, so I think before...
Sorry,
before
Brian.
we move on, yeah, do you want to show the video of these?
I'll do my best.
Yep.
Okay. Okay, so this is the wild boar, free living wild boar opening the boss. There's a yellow marker at the base of the boss. This is another sow that clearly has fed before because she's yellow. Wild boar normally are not yellow on the top of their nose. And the piglets are also happily feeding. This is plain bait, so there's no contraceptive in it, but it's just to testing the idea. Okay.
Okay, thanks, Giovanna. We have some time and we're going to take some questions, and the questions are in Slido and I'm going to refer to them. So we bear in mind that this is an international edition and we have Giovanna. So we are going to direct questions mostly to her. So we're going to squeeze her for her expertise, and then we are going to therefore use questions which are in line with her area of knowledge. So local context, we will put lower on the priority, and we're going to ask her about questions that are more general in nature about the methods and also the situation in Europe where experiences. The first one, what are the existing mitigation methods? Giovanna, can you see the questions on the screen?
Yes, I can.
Yeah, we're going to look at the one highlighted in green. What are the existing mitigation methods for human-boar conflict? And as we become more urbanized, how do we reduce this? You might have covered quite a bit of that in your presentation, but do you have anything to add on to this question?
No, I think I did cover most of it. Maybe just to add what every sensible city is doing now, and I understand Singapore is doing the same. Impress on people that feeding, they should not feed, they should maintain distance. Taking selfies with piglets is not a good idea, or taking selfies with these animals is not a good idea, because generally the vast majority of time they will not attack people, but if it's only 1%, is 1% too many. So these are wild animals, and although they can be very cute when they're young, they can inflict serious injuries if they're scared. So keep the distance, and certainly do not feed and discourage people feeding them, because that will lead to serious accidents.
Thank you, Giovanna. Yeah, in Singapore, we do have quite harsh penalties for people who do provide food to pigs. And I think there's been quite a number of enforcement cases that came out in the media. So I think that awareness is quite widespread now, getting more. I think everybody knows that you don't feed wildlife, especially wild pig. The next question, Giovanna, I'm not sure whether you're able to answer this. Are there useful methods citizens can take to counter boar encroachments and attacks, including high radio frequency, fire extinguishers, or guard dogs? In your experience, Giovanna, do you think any of this will be useful?
So for, I would say, at least 50 years, I remember papers from the 70s that tried to use a number of deterrents to stop wild boar from entering an area. And very often around the world, hunters will have their own method, their secret recipe to stop wild boar from entering or exiting the area. And my understanding is that none of these methods really work. In fact, fire extinguishers or guard dogs, I would be very careful about them, because what could happen is the opposite. Animals will become aggressive, wild boar will become aggressive because they're just defending themselves. So I would be very, very careful to use any of these methods unless they have been proven to work in a number of contexts and to work 100%. Otherwise, better not to.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Yeah. Going down to the next question. With reference to Germany, will returning wolf population have an impact on the wild pig population in Germany?
Yeah.
I think we have in mind the story of the three little pigs.
So there are wolves are returning in big numbers across Europe, but there are a number of papers now that suggest, so these several papers compare the impact of large predators like wolves and hunting on wild boar populations. And hunting is really far, has the biggest impact. large predators are more likely to prey upon piglets or young animals, but they don't have a big impact. So the return of large predators is not going to stop the demographic explosion of wild boar.
Yeah, I think we are aware also, Giovanna, that the growing population of wolf in some parts of Europe is also presenting with its own set of issues, right?
Very much so. So you and I were recently in the Netherlands, where we're at this conference on the social aspects of human-wildlife conflict, and some large carnivores, the introduction or reintroduction or recovery of some large carnivores has been so successful in several parts of Europe now that they have now become problem animals. So yes, there are major issues also with the wolf. Again, I just, yesterday evening, I was dining with somebody who was telling me that he was working in Spain, where there are a lot of wolves, but it is also an area where there are a lot of sheep farmers. And obviously, if the wolves can choose between a wild boar and a sheep, they will go for the sheep. So that's why the problems are multiplying.
Thank you, Giovanna. We have time for a few more questions. Giovanna, are you okay to take a few more?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, yeah. Okay, we'll go down to the next one. Yeah, this is very directed at you. What was the reason to explore contraception? Was it because of public opinion? And then is it that culling is not working despite decades of hunting?
Yeah, thank you. I think I love this question because it allows me to say why on earth are we working on contraception. It is certainly for both those reasons. Public opinion around the world is going away from killing or culling. I'm not saying this is right at all. I can certainly see now a big place for culling because we don't have anything else. But then the humaneness of culling and the way you do it counts. And so I could see a lot of people saying, if you can develop something that will not involve killing, that's what society wants. And it is also because the number of people willing to kill, particularly at large scale, like across Germany, across Italy, across France, is decreasing. And so, and the impact of wild boar is increasing. So we need some solutions in addition to culling that will complement culling.
Thank you, Giovanna. There's another part of that question. Is culling alone something that will not work despite being done for decades?
So culling will definitely work very well because in Europe, between the two wars, wild boar were wiped out. So they disappeared completely from very, very large parts of Europe, or sometimes even from countries. So culling, obviously, it will work if applied at the right, with the right number, on the right proportion. The problem is that now it is not applied to large proportion of animals, and that's why they keep growing. During the war, it made a lot of sense for people to kill animals because they were eating them because people were starving. Now the situation is very different, and so people don't need to kill to eat. And a lot of people, I was told that a lot of hunters prefer to stay at home and play video games rather than or shoot animals through video games rather than shooting them in reality. So that's why the gap is increasing and we need to think about something to do.
Okay. Giovanna, I think the next question will be of interest to you. When is the oral contraceptive going to be ready? So I can speak for Giovanna when more funding comes in. So if there are anybody in the audience who is interested in supporting this cause, Giovanna's email can be obtained from us. Giovanna, but I'll leave you to answer the question proper.
Spot on, Chimben. So yes, so it is a mystery to me to think about the amount of damage or impacts, environmental and economic impacts of wild boar across the world. And we are talking about billions, as I said, compared to maybe $3 to $5 billion that will be needed to develop an oral contraceptive. And that's where my effort now with several other groups are going to see whether we can raise the funding for this, because it would be a game changer for everybody.
Thank you, Giovanna. I think this next question is about how much of the population must you sterilize in order for it to be effective. I think you might answer part of it in the presentation, but do you want to talk more about this?
Yes, thank you. So yes, so if you use fertility control only, at least according to the model, and I would like to see it in practice because the model is just a mathematical prediction, is that through fertility control only you're unlikely to decrease population size. However, if you couple, if I remember correctly, 40% of culling with between 40 and 60% of fertility control, both absolutely doable, even with the reasonably small number of people willing to use lethal control, that is likely to be a success in terms of how to bringing the population to levels that are acceptable for their impact.
Thank you. The next one is translocation. Is translocation of whole family something doable? Is it viable? Giovanna, again, just now I think she spoke a bit about this, but again, Giovanna, if you have more to say about this question.
Yeah, I am personally, I am against translocation of problem animals, and I can send whoever is interested a paper that we produced with several colleagues several years ago now about translocation of problem animals. And that is because, as I was saying before, it perpetuates the idea of quick fix. You can translocate a whole family, besides the fact that a whole family is very difficult to trap a whole sounder, which means several females with their piglets. But even if you were able to do it, which is not very easy, then you would put it in an area where these animals will not know the area, but will know that people are a source of food, so they will start bothering people again about food. Is not going to work well. These animals can go back where they were before. They can suffer more traffic accidents because they're not familiar with the area. They will definitely be in worse shape in terms of welfare because their immune system will be alerted to the fact that all the pathogens, all the stress will not be very good for them. And so you might have outbreaks of diseases. So I don't think translocation should ever be encouraged only for problem animals. For conservation is a completely different thing.
Thank you. Germany, how far away from urban areas is hunting allowed? So I'm not sure if you know about Germany, but if you know about any regulations in other parts of Europe as well, just, yeah.
I should know for Italy, but I don't remember. It is away from houses, but not that much away from houses, but from built areas, but I don't remember. I'm afraid I can find out.
No problem. Thank you, Giovanna. You've mentioned many examples in Europe. Are you familiar with what's happening in the US?
Yes. So in the US, wild boar, wild pigs are not native. So many people see it as yet another reason for not having been there. They have expanded and increased dramatically, and they're increasing as we speak. and there are a number of things tried in the States. They can shoot from helicopters, which is definitely not the case for Europe or for highly populated areas. We couldn't do it. They are considering poisoning, but then recently, I think it was Texas that was considering warfarin, which is a rodenticide, very inhumane rodenticide, and there was a big public opinion wave against it. So toxicants were not toxicant, warfarin was shelved. There are other toxicants that are meant to be much more humane, produced in Australia, that in the States are being considered. Some of these, however, can affect non-target species. And in the States, some, again, I can send the paper to whoever wanted, because it's a very interesting paper from an American colleague. Some states have banned hunting because they realized that hunters were the main people, the main group responsible for translocations, for illegal translocations, to have more animals to hunt. So it's a very, very big mixed bag, but is also different in terms of density of people and what they can or they cannot do.
Thank you. I think I think maybe the person who asked the question might also be interested in finding out about the scale of the problem in the US, or are there a lot of pigs? Is it a situation that's going out of control that they are resorting to shooting from helicopters and even using things like warfarin?
So there are millions of wild boar. I don't remember how many millions they have estimated, but I remember that must have been at least 10 years ago when somebody in the States got up in a conference and said, Texas is going out of control. We have shot 30,000 wild boar last year. And I said, well, actually, Texas is similar in size to Germany. And I said, in Germany, they're shooting 500,000. So you're just going that direction. And indeed, they are. So there are, I think in the States, there are some localized populations where wild boar appear as if they have flown there. In fact, they have been probably translocated there. And in small isolated population, if they act quickly and they send people, ranger, sharpshooter, they do manage to remove the whole population. But in other parts like Florida, like California, they're everywhere. And in California, in fact, they are now affecting the grapes, the vineyards. So they are a big problem. And I've tried everything, but in California in particular, toxicants are definitely not on the cards. So same problem as in Italy, and just growing.
Thank you. I think also the boars in America are also like maybe like the people compared to Singaporeans, they are way bigger than the ones we have in Singapore.
I didn't catch
the size of the wild boars, I think in America are very large.
In terms of size, in Europe, you have in the southwest, so towards Spain, you will have adult wild boar that are 50, 70 kilos. In the northeast, in Russia, you will have wild boar that are up to 200 kilos. And the hunters have translocated for decades the big wild boar down to the south because they want bigger trophies. So there's a big mixture across Europe, and I wouldn't be surprised. So in the US, there is a lot of mixture. That's why they're called feral swine, because they're also intermixed with pigs, like in Europe, but much less so, because they're the same species. And when you cross the wild boar with a pig, you obtain a greater new next generation in larger animals and more fertile also.
Thank you. The next question, this person seems to maybe knows a bit about background. He's asking whether you could share about wild boar management in Hong Kong. You were quite closely involved in the wild boar situation there. Could you tell us a bit more?
Yes. So we started the project in Hong Kong a few years ago. Is not finished. Is going to be finished soon, and the project was starting with injectable contraceptives because there was a total ban on culling, which was, I think it was widespread to other species also in Hong Kong. The animals were also translocated, and I think it was a good idea that they did translocation initially, then they found out that translocations really didn't work for all the reasons that we have mentioned, but I thought it was good of them to do it because they could demonstrate that they didn't work. So we injected several animals with, tens of animals with gonocon, and then we had initially some problems in relocating this animal, because to see whether it works, an injectable contraceptive works, you need to find the animal again and check whether the animal has given birth or has piglets and so on. So that was one of the issues we had in Hong Kong. As I said, the project is ongoing. My understanding is that Hong Kong is now doing some removal. So they're killing animals because, again, they're going out of control.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay. Next question is a very Singaporean question for my screen. Oh, okay, it just changed. But the question I was looking at was, can wild pigs be a human food source? Can we eat ourselves out of this problem? This is a Singaporean question. It's not only a Singaporean will ask that. But I think I will go to the other one that just skipped without a queue. Any insights on laparoscopic sterilization methods? Dr. Giovanna, are you familiar with this issue, this topic?
Yes, so I've seen it working in Hong Kong. I've seen it working very, very well in macaques, and they indeed, some of the vets are also doing laparoscopy sterilization on younger pigs. On a larger pig, my understanding is that is much more difficult. So that wouldn't work on a larger pigs, which is why we are trying to develop oral contraceptives.
Thanks for that. If I can also add on to that thing, there's something that we actually also in NParks we were looking at. Of course, the problem with laparoscopy is that it is still a surgery, and you still need to catch a pig. And after you catch a pig there and you do the surgery, there is still a period of recovery. And wild boars, their very nature, they are very high strung. And during that period of recovery, over maybe 2 days or 1 day, when they wake up from their sedation, they are going to be quite agitated, and it actually is not good for their welfare as well. So those are probably the road harms that we have to look at when we talk about surgery in wild boars.
Can I add something to this?
Yes, go ahead, Joanna.
So you made a very important point. The other important point of this is that unless you do it on a very, very, very high proportion of the population, as we have seen, you will not have an effect in terms of size of the population. And also a wild boar that has been sterilized, doesn't matter whether it's surgically or chemically, will still be there for many years, because wild boar will live between up to 12, certainly up to 12 years old. And so if they are problem animals that take food from people because people have been feeding them, they will continue to do so.
Thank you. Okay, I think we have one question, one time for one more question. It's 4:59. And we'll end off with this very general question. What are do and don'ts for general public when encountering wild boars? I think they are talking about from the safety aspects. If they are walking and they chance upon a wild boar, do you have any advice for them?
Just behaved. I know it's difficult when you have an animal that is 100 kilo in front of you, but just behave very calmly. Don't wave sticks or have your dogs barking at the wild boar. Move away from the wild boar. Wild boar, when they are stressed, they will face up a person, go woof. That sounds very intimidating, but it's a way of being stressed. So I think the best thing is to walk away from it calmly.
Yep. Thank you, Giovanna. And to add on to that, that's also the reason why we don't want people to be walking dogs in the nature reserve, because of this kind of reaction they can provoke in wild animals. Okay, with that, I think we are going to give Dr. Giovanna a rest. We understand you had to wake up really, really very early over in UK for this session. So thank you very much, Dr. Giovanna. To everybody else, thank you for joining us this afternoon. We hope that you've learned something from this and that you will be interested enough to stay tuned for our next session, where we will be, I'm not sure what are we talking about next one. All right. We are keeping it suspense, so keep a lookout for the next topic, right? So with that, I'm going to close this session. Dr. Giovanna, again, thank you very much for your time, and everybody else, thank you and have a great weekend.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Are you staying on? I wanted to share a couple of things. Serena, you are muted. Okay.
Can you just give us a minute? Hang on.
Yeah.
Hi, Ben. Is this the Ben Lee that we know? Hi, Benjamin.
No, it's not. I'm not anyone, you know.
Do you want to turn on your camera? We're just going to say thank you to Giovanna. And Chumbing has already exited the call.
Oh, no.
I can see a ghost of Chumben.
Yeah.
Okay.
Let me stop the recording as well. Wait,
One thing that was